Assalamu alaikum students, this is your teacher Muhammad Umar Khatak for the subject Organizational Theory and Behavior, and this is our 19th lecture, and today we'll be starting chapter number 8. And the topic of our discussion is selection, influence on selection, process and selection criteria. Selection. Selection is the process by which an organization chooses from a list of applicants that persons who best meet the selection criteria for the position available, considering current environmental conditions. Although this definition emphasizes the effectiveness of selection, decisions about whom to hire must also be made efficiently and within the boundaries set forth in equal employment opportunity legislation. Thus, there are multiple goals associated with an organization selection process, including selecting applicants who are most likely to: Number 1. Meet or exceed the performance objectives associated with the position to be filled. Contribute to the effectiveness of the organization by staying with the company on a long-term basis and occupying different positions. Perform quality work and be reliable and satisfied with their jobs and the organization. Before these goals can be met, organizational decision makers need to consider how internal and external environmental factors impact the selection process. For example, if somebody wants to hire, what are the influences that will affect the hiring process? Now, influences on the selection process, we talk about external and internal influences. The first is internal environment. Several characteristics of the organization can influence the amount and type of selection processes it uses to hire employees. Size, complexity, and technological volatility are a few of these, since the development and implementation of large-scale selection efforts can be very costly. Complex selection systems are most often found in larger organizations with the economic resources necessary to pay for such systems. Size alone, however, does not matter how selection is approached. For an organization to recover the cost of developing an expensive selection system, there must be enough jobs that need to be filled. In structurally complex organizations with many job titles but very few occupants, the number of years needed to get back the money invested in such a selection system may be too great to justify its initial expense. Another characteristic of the organization that is an important determinant of what kind of selection system it develops is the attitude about hiring from within. Many organizations have elaborate internal job posting programs designed to help fill as many jobs vacancies as possible from within. Other organizations look more quickly to external personnel pools of new employees. While these two models of filling job vacancies will have some overlapping selection processes, each will also focus to some extent on different criteria and different techniques. External environment. The external environment is an equally important determinant of the kind of selection system that an organization utilizes. Not only are most organizations subject to federal employment laws and regulation, but there are many state-specific regulations that also affect what an organization can and cannot do in its selection system. Some states, for example, have imposed much tighter limits than others on an organization's ability to test applicants for drug use. Similarly, a number of states provide past employers with more protection against being sued by a former employee because of information that may have been divulged during checking of references. Any or all of these state specific issues can affect the selection system that is ultimately used. One of the most significant environmental influences on selection is the size, composition, and availability of local labor markets. These, in turn, are affected by economic, social, political pressures on a community. At a basic level, when unemployment rates are low, it may be difficult for an organization to identify, attract, and hire the number of people it needs. On the other hand, during an economic recession, when there is an oversupply of qualified applicants, selection strategies need to focus more on sifting through larger number of applicants so the best candidates are identified. Those who work in human resource management evaluate the effects of labor market on selection decisions by using a selection ratio. Selection ratio: number of applicants hired divided by total number of applicants. Consider Clark Kirby's problem at Gunther. The selection ratios are as follows. When they were selecting managers, their ratio was almost 1:2. Professional technicals, 1:1. Clerical staff, 1:2. Skilled, 1:1. Semi-skilled, almost 1:2. When the selection ratio gets close to 1:1, it is called a high selection ratio. Under these circumstances, the selection process is short and unsophisticated, although it may not be very effective. As the number of applicants increase relative to the number who are hired, the selection ratio is said to be low. With a lower selection ratio, for example, 1:2, the process becomes more detailed. A ratio of 1:2 also means that the organization can be more selective in its choice than when the ratio is 1:1. It is therefore more likely that employees who fit the organization's criteria for success will be hired. It is also likely, however, that organizations will have to invest more time and money in the selection decision when the ratio is 1:2. Selection criteria. Categories of criteria. With these potential differences in mind, the criteria typically used by organizations for making selection decisions can be summarized in several broad categories: education, experience, physical characteristics, and other personal characteristics. Formal education. An employer selecting from a pool of job applicants wants to choose the person who has the right abilities and attitudes to be successful. Formal education. A large number of cognitive, motor, physical, and interpersonal attributes are present because of genetic predisposition and because they were learned at home, at school, on the job, and so on. One of the more common cost effective ways to screen for many of these abilities is by using educational accomplishment as a surrogate for a summary of these measures of those abilities. For example, this is unfortunately not always true. It usually is safe to assume that anyone who has successfully completed high school or its equivalent has basic reading, writing, arithmetic, and interpersonal skills. For certain jobs, the employer may stipulate that education, especially for college level requirements, is in particular area of expertise such as accounting or management. The employer might also prefer that the degree be from a certain institution, that the grade point average be higher than some minimum, and that certain honors have been achieved. To be legal, educational standards such as these must be related to successful performance of the job. Care must be exercised not to set standards that are higher than the actually required by the job. Experienced and past performance. Another useful criteria for selecting employees is experience and past performance. Many selection specialists believe that past performance on a similar job might be one of the best indicators of future performance. In addition, employers often consider experience to be a good indicator of ability and work related attitudes. Their reasoning is that prospective employee who has performed the job before and is applying for a similar job must like the work and must be able to do the job well. Research supports these assumptions. Over a large number of studies, experience is related to job performance. But the organization must have a rational basis for defining what it means by relevant experience. Not all previous experiences are equally good predictors of performance on a given job. Should two applicants applying for a job as an internal auditor be given the same credit for previous work experience if both have 5 years in accounting profession but one has been an auditor for an unknown organization and the other a tax specialist for the IRS? Physical characteristics. In the past, many employers consciously or unconsciously used physical characteristics, including how an applicant looked, as a criterion. Studies found that employers were more likely to hire and pay better wages to taller men, and airlines chose flight attendants and companies hired receptionists on the basis of beauty. Physical characteristics. Many times, such practices discriminated against ethnic groups, older people, and people with disabilities. For this reason, they are now illegal unless it can be shown that a physical characteristic is directly related to effectiveness at work. For example, visual acuity could be a physical characteristic that could be used to hire commercial airline pilots. It might not, however, be legally used for hiring a telephone reservation agent for an airline. Personal characteristics and personality type. The final criterion category is catch all that includes personal characteristics and personality types. Personal characteristics include marital status, sex, age, and so on. Some employees have, for example, preferred stable married employees who are single people because they have assumed that married people have a lower turnover rate. On the other hand, other employees might seek out single people for some jobs, since single people might be more likely to accept a transfer or lengthy overseas assignment. Specific aptitudes and skills can also be considered part of this category of criteria. Although education and past experience are often used as measures of ability, many organizations also try to assess whether applicants possess certain aptitudes. For example, a successful applicant for pilot training in the military does not need actual flying experience. Rather, the military uses spatial relation aptitude as one criterion. Many employers also prefer to hire people with certain personality types. Some jobs, such as being a lifeguard, may require essentially no consideration of an applicant's personality. Many jobs fall between these extremes. For example, one particular aspect of personality, such as being outgoing, may be useful for salespeople, caseworkers, or others who work extensively with public. As with other personnel characteristics, selection using any aspect of personality should always be based on whether it is really necessary for high performance. Many personalities measures run an even greater risk of being legally challenged as an invasion of privacy than other kinds of selection tools. Thus, the organization wishing to use personality as a criterion must be certain that successful and unsuccessful employees can be distinguished in terms of their personalities. It is probably unwise to use personality as a general criterion for screening out undesirable applicants, since the same personality characteristics that leads to failure in one job might lead to success in another. In part because of this fact, there is still considerable debate whether general, broad personality measures or more specific ones are the best to use in selection. The selection process. In the past, selection was often thought to be an easy decision. Decisions were based on subjective likes or dislikes of the boss. Selection tools were designed to aid this gut reaction. Today, selection is viewed as much more than simply relying on intuition. The selection decision is usually perceived as a series of steps through which applicants pass. At each step, more applicants are screened out by the organization, or more applicants accept other job offers and drop from the list of applicants. Preliminary screening. Step 1. The most common first step in any selection process usually involves asking an applicant to complete an online or paper application form. Application blanks, as these are typically referred to, vary in length and sophistication. Nearly all application blanks ask for enough information to determine whether the individual is minimally qualified for the position. For example, application blanks can be a useful initial screening tool for jobs that require some type of professional certification. In this way, the application blank can eliminate the need for subsequent interviews to gather this information. This makes the selection process far more efficient. First, by reducing the number of applicants that need to be interviewed, and second, by allowing interviewers to focus on other kinds of information, for example, personality and communication skills, that are perhaps more difficult to obtain. Although application blanks can be very useful selection tools, organizations must never forget that they are subject to the same legal standards as any other selection method. Thus, care must be taken that the application blank does not directly or indirectly violate federal or provincial laws related to employment discrimination. The same guidelines hold true for web based or online applications. The application blank should not be designed in a way that forces applicants to reveal irrelevant information about themselves, especially information related to sex, race, religion, color, national origin, age, or disabilities. A research study found that applicants who were not hired after completing an application blank that contained illegally worded questions were more likely to feel unfairly treated and have higher litigation intentions against the employer. Care should be taken to ask only for information that will help the organization make a better job related assessment of the applicant. For example, asking applicants for the year in which they graduated from high school can narrow down their age to within 1 or 2 years. Is it important to know in what year someone graduated, or simply that he or she graduated? Currently accepted application blanks also generally limit questions that imply something about the applicant's physical health. Since a physical exam should be given only after conditional offer of employment, the application blank is not an appropriate place to gather most information of this kind. With a dramatic increase in the number of lawsuits being filed against organizations for wrongful termination, and with an erosion of organizations' right to hire and fire whomever they wish, many organizations are now adding very important clauses at the beginning or end of their application blanks. Some terms of these clauses appear in employee handbooks as well. The purpose of the clauses, regardless of where they appear, is twofold. First, they help protect the organization against unjustified lawsuits, and second, they help ensure that applicants and employees understand the terms of their employment relationship with the organization. Three of the most common clauses that now appear on application blanks and in employee handbooks cover: number one, the applicant's right as they relate to the organization's hiring practices, the scope of an employment contract, and the grievances, a statement indicating that the applicant, the employee, or both agree to resolve all grievances against the organization through arbitration and mediation rather than through a lawsuit. A potentially useful supplement to the traditional application blank is the biographical information blank, which is used to collect biodata from the applicant. A biographical information blank usually contains many more items than a typical application blank and asks for information related to a much wider array of attitudes and experiences. Biographical information blanks are based on an assumption that these prior behaviors and experiences will be strongly related to applicants' future behavior. For example, a common biographical information blank item asks applicants to list their favorite subjects in high school. Use of the responses to an item such as this assumes that people who preferred English will perform differently on a given job from people who preferred science or math. Whether such an item should be included on biographical information background data, however, depends on its ability to differentiate the performance of good and poor workers on the job in question. Research indicates that biographical information blanks can help predict job performance in certain instances. For example, a research study found that biographical information blank items can account for incremental predictability of key performance variables beyond that accounted for by incumbent experience on the job, relevant Big Five personality constructs, and general mental ability tests. This is the end of the topic and the lecture. Thank you.